because it wrote itself. And if he remembered a week later the one idea he had added to that he wanted in there, and it wasn't there, he'd send me back to rewrite it. But other than that, it was fine. As long as the one piece of it, and I got very talented at figuring out what one piece of a story was the one he was married to. Other than that, but I don't know if that has to do with structure, but he was a little into it.
Well,
you say that with love in your voice, right? Because Julie was one of the legendary characters.
He gave me everything I had, except my dad, he gave me a little. Julie was great.
Okay, but editors or publishers, are there things that you realize, like Eliott knew he needed to give Julie that one kernel? Are there things you realize you need to do for these other publishers or editors?
can I speak for, can I dominate the panel as I have for just a moment more? I had a very interesting experience recently that's never happened to me before, and it was almost flattering, but very interesting. So, not Marvel, not DC, but a smaller company came to me and said, we want you to do some create your own stuff. And mostly these are people I've worked with before or who know me on an editorial level. And they said, we'd like you to do some create your own stuff. And in fact, we all sat down together this morning and talked about your work and talked about the things that we think you do best and the way you approach stories and study how you do what you do. And let's talk about that and work backward from there to figure out what might fit everything that we want to do. And that was amazing, and it made it much easier for me to come up with an idea. They weren't dictating anything to me. I could have gone off book if I wanted to, but if they said, you especially seem to shine when you're writing teenagers, or you especially seem to shine when you're writing puzzle stories that are very heavy on mind, figuring things out, smart guys. And that was great.
So what did they say? What were your strengths? I'm curious.
They actually said, writing teenagers, and they actually said, which is not bad for a 55-year-old man. And they said, again, writing the stories about intellect, uber alles, that the smart guy wins in the end.
You used to be a kid.
I used to be a kid. That's
you
where
were
I
smart
grew up
kid,
from.
too. The small companies are kind of great. I'm doing a mini-series for a small company now, and they just said, make up something. And I made up something and sent it in saying, is this the sort of thing that, because it was a little off from what they usually do. And they said, oh yeah, great, do it. But it was as simple as that. I love working for the small companies. They are the best.
Yeah.
So one aspect of the story writing I want to touch on before I open this up to questions, because I suspect there's one or two in the audience, is the role research plays. Once you come up with your conflict or your character or your premise, how much research do you require on a general basis? I mean, obviously some stories will require more than others, but anybody?
I
research?
Lots.
Before
Lots
Google
and lots.
existed, I have no idea how we did it. But
Yeah,
The encyclopedia.
the Reader's Guide to Periodical
Yes.
Literature.
Yeah, exactly.
As much
Do they still do
research
that?
as that particular story needs.
Yes.
Right.
And
More
if I'm doing
research than it needs often.
Yeah.
But like,
It's
his
constantly-
bullseye, did you study a lot of weapons?
No, I make up that stuff. He just shoots people. What's the difference?
Bernie Wrightson used to
When
draw
I'm
these
doing, for
helicopters.
instance, Night Force, which always uses historical fact in the background, I could spend an awful lot of time just researching every element of the story, because it has to be correct whether or not the readers know about it. I had in my last one a story that took place in North Dakota in the 1800s during the worst snowstorm ever, because I found out that was the time of the worst snowstorm ever, and I had to do a story that required it, so I made sure it fit within the time limit. That book is rooted in a reality,
Right.
so that the supernatural elements all seem to make sense in the real world. Other books, you don't have to do any research except maybe some character stuff and things like that.
Late great Bernie Wrightson story?
Oh, no, just that Dick Giordano used to do incredible research. He knew everything about guns, everything about vehicles, everything about hardware, and everything was accurate. Bernie, on the other hand, would make up a whole world. He would do these great bulbous helicopters that looked like bumblebees. They couldn't possibly fly. But in Burning World, they were great.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is there a time where you were doing the research and it changed your story?
Ooh, I have an answer.
Okay.
But no, you were.
All right, James, then Mark.
Yeah.
The thing that I run into almost most often is that I don't realize I'm doing the research while I'm doing the research. I'm like, it's a lot of when I'm reading nonfiction and I'm reading, you know, just I think a lot of, you know, most writers like read a lot, and there's a lot of, and everything I'm kind of taking in then gets resynthesized and then put out into the books, and then a lot of times I'll be and I'll sort of realize after the fact, oh, these are the last 5 books I've read. They're all kind of on the same theme. Like, what is the heart of that theme that I'm really interested in? What am I trying to answer by reading these books? And I kind of sit down and think with that, and then a lot of times that's where a new idea kind of comes from. There's something I'm developing right now that it's just like I looked at my stack of nonfiction books for the last year, and I was just like, oh, like I didn't realize I was doing that, but I've been getting ready for a project, and I didn't know that.
Well, that's cool. Mark?
So a few months ago, I was talking with the Archie publisher, and this may or may not happen somewhere down the line, but he was asking specifically for a series called Archie 1941, which is going to be the characters set in 1941, and especially how they dealt with the lead up to World War II and Pearl Harbor and so forth and so on. And so I was able to build this highly intricate, structured story about the town and its fear of, well, what if my kid gets drafted? What if Reggie gets drafted? What if Archie gets drafted? I send my kid across the sea, and then getting real personal there. And the whole thing really hinged on that. You know what the draft age was in 1941? 21.
Really?
Yeah. Yeah. So talk about steering a Corvette into a brick wall. Yeah.
Okay. I'm going to put my English teacher hat on for just 1 second. For any of the writers in the room, I really want to emphasize writers read, and writers read broadly and deeply. And it's fiction and it's nonfiction. It's the newspaper, it's a scientific journal. It's, as long as you understand it. The key is, I cannot tell you how many ideas I have had as a writer or as an editor based on I've read something in the paper, or I read an article in Time Magazine or Smithsonian or whatever. It is an amazing font of stuff, and then you don't realize, you know, sometimes it just sits in the back of your mind until you need it at that moment, and you can pull it out. With that, let's see what the audience wants to ask and go from there. Yes, sir.
How do you guys feel about writing via the Marvel method, which appears to dilute the influence of the writer, versus what I'll call a more traditional method or the traditional DC
So
method?
plot first versus full script.
Yeah, where the writer has virtually directorial control.
I like Marvel style. I think that comics are a visual medium, and if you give an artist you give them a story that's visual, that they're reading the story and they're seeing pictures in their heads. I think the pictures in their heads are probably, well, they wouldn't necessarily be better, but they would be different than the ones that I would see. So why should I ask him to draw the ones that I see instead of the ones he sees? I think the stories look better. And I think that comic readers are attracted to stories by the pictures, but I think they keep reading them for the stories and the characters. So I prefer Marvel style. I can write the other way, but I don't think you get the, but you also, for Marvel style, you need a smart artist. And I mean, and I've worked with some really intelligent artists, so this may be why I really enjoy Marvel style the most.
You've definitely been spoiled.
Same here.
I know I have.
Same here. The plot, doing the plot first, if depending upon how much detail you put into the plot. My plots were very, very detailed, broken down page by page.
Mine are too.
You let the artist pace it, and you let them tell the story. They know exactly what you want, but they're free to show it their way. And then you're coming back, and you could write to their faces. You could write the emotions. If their storytelling is perfect, you don't have to explain something. You can write a line that's more character-driven because the story has been pushed forward by the artist. So it allows for more emotions made and also better stories.
Okay. Yes, sir.
Sometimes the way you draw a person into the story depends very much on how you start. And that two kind of like different ways of doing it. You can start with a big reveal and then what led to that thing, or you can start with, what the storyline and then end up with a big reveal. For example, an apocalyptic story can start with presenting the apocalypse and then explaining how it happened, or tells you the timeline and then the end is, surprise, the apocalypse happened. So what is your opinion of how to start and what best draws a person into a story?
All right, so for those who didn't hear the full question, do you prefer starting with the big reveal and figure out how we got there, or the build up to that big reveal?
Whichever makes the most compelling 20-page
Yeah.
comic book.
Yeah.
Like, it depends either way sometimes. Sometimes one is better, sometimes the other is better. They're both tools
Yeah.
Whatever draws the reader into the story the best. There was this period where we used to start with a big splash page, which was a scene from inside the story somewhere. You take the best scene and you put it on the front, and then you start the story. That was kind of artificial, but it would draw you in.
Actually, queuing off that, I'd like to throw to the panel, like, I find that when I write any story, page 1 takes me almost as much time as the next 19 pages. Is that accurate? Is that
For me, it's not only how you're telling the story, but the type of dialogue, the type of captions, the type of approach that you take. You have to make your decision right up front. And page 1 very often takes us just as long as the rest of the book. Yeah.
It sets the tone for the rest of the story, yeah.
James, did you have a thought? I'm
No,
sorry.
I was just
All right.
agreeing.
Easy. Okay.
You have
Back.
to learn not to panic at that point.
Yeah.
You mentioned character development for the protagonists, the good guys. Do you use the same technique for the character development for the antagonists, the bad guys?
Yeah, they're more vivid characters. They have to be developed in your head before
What they
show
want,
up.
why they want it.
It's all the same to make them real
Yeah.
as you can. And you should know as much as you can about every one of those characters, good, bad, and in fact incidental characters.
Yeah, supporting characters in particular, because they help round out that character's world.
Although with villains, if you don't reveal what your idea of their origin is in enough time, sometimes somebody else will reveal their origin and it's not what you thought at all.
The voice of experience.
Yes.
Yeah, John.
I was wondering if you guys could speak to like outside influences on your stories. Like if you have a story and the editor says, no, I don't like that, make it more like this, or there's a big company crossover coming up, and it changes it from what you originally intended. How do you deal with that?
Salt.
I would say that a lot of times, it can be very frustrating because you put a lot of your heart and soul into these books, but ultimately they're, especially when we're talking about big 2 books, they're parts of, they're corporations, they have to hit certain goals, they're tied into, they need to support their big events and all of that, and that can throw a wrench into plans.
And you would be surprised at how often that happens on the fly.
Yeah.
Oh, yes.
Gotta
Yeah.
be flexible. Gotta be
No,
flexible.
and that's the thing, it's sort of holding to, if you take a few steps back to what is your story what is the emotional heart of what you're doing? And if something that the company brings to you breaks the emotional heart of it, or stands in the way of the character getting to where they need to get to say what you're trying to say with the story, that's when I sort of, I fight back, and I'm just no, I need this, so you rework this little thing to make it all work together, and sometimes I win, sometimes I lose, but it's it's sort of standing up for the heart of your story, because the plot can change over and over and over again. The plot is almost incidental to the emotional heart of the character.
Let me take that one step further and say that he's protecting his story. The editor should be protecting the writer and should be communicating that there's this thing coming up and you need to be prepared, that it's going to impact the next 3 issues or whatever. There has to be a lot more communication and hopefully a lot of pre-planning so that the writers can give it their best participation. Yes, ma'am? Yes, you.
Given your prolific product and elevated status, do you find that you are pitching to the big houses and small houses, or they're essentially, saying, run with this idea or run with this character?
The smaller the house, that you're dealing with, the more chance you have to do that.
The faster you can run, yes.
Yeah.
That's why I'm working for myself now.
Yes, sir.
There was a lot of talk about ensemble casts and team books and things like that earlier, and I was just wondering how you go about spacing out, like, so when an issue features one particular character, how you go about making sure you don't have too much of one character in too short a space.
Question is servicing an ensemble cast. If you're focusing on Archie, how do you make sure you don't lose sight of Jughead, Reggie, and others?
Here's a concrete example. So, doing a Champions Avengers crossover in a couple of months. Not my idea, but that's okay. I can make that work. And by the way, worse, it was a 4-part story. 4-part story, I'll figure out a 4-part story. I got a 4-part story, and I'm sitting with my editor, and he says, well, when you do your 6-part story, oh my God. My monocle popped out and all. But what I do, and again, your mileage will probably vary, I literally take trading cards or little standees or whatever it is, action figures or whatever, of these characters and put them on my desk as I write so that I can always remember, oh, Aquaman hadn't had a line of dialogue in a while, let's do something with him. And sort of move them around like chess pieces to make sure that I have the visual cue to remember that, oh, Hercules didn't do anything since page 2. Bring him forward.
I was a big fan of 3x5 cards until they invented Post-it notes.
So I was just asking Weezy about, when she was editing the X books or writing for them, how, they had an even larger ensemble.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, I just made lists of the characters, and I would kind of know. Well, you know what? In a way, I almost had the lists in my head, because when you work with characters, they're like your pals. You haven't seen Colossus in a while. Maybe somebody should run into him.
And yet, I always forget Red Wing when I'm writing.
I know. This is why I have lists, and every once in a while I go through the list. Oh gosh, I forgot him. Yeah.
Red Wing, the actual
But I do
yes.
lists.
I think it's in your head if you're working with the same group of characters all the time. And I don't mind an issue where only two of the characters show up. I think changing the dynamic of a story keeps people interested and keeps it fresh. And if you're trying to service every character, every single story in exactly the same way, it becomes repetitious and formulaic. I like to throw a wrench in there, and maybe we just do an issue that has 2 characters this month. Eventually, over a course of a year, they'll all get approximately the same amount of panel space. But I don't think you have to worry about it every single issue, as long as you have a game plan and you're keeping tabs on what you're doing.
I'll say, as a reader, you notice some of these things, and some of these books really catch on with their audience or reach a new level when you do focus on 1 or 2 of the characters. I remember everyone suddenly was looking at Titans differently with issue 8, which focused on Cyborg and that, and then there was Birds of Prey number 8, which was a flashback between Dick and Barbara, and that was a really sweet, just a 2-person story, and that was a team book. So.
Yeah, I'm not sure Marv gets enough credit for sparking all of that, because that Titans number 8 was really the first time in superhero comics that somebody had the guts to do a story that wasn't somebody punching somebody else, but was instead a day in the life of this character or that character, which is now a trope. Now we do, but Marv kicked that off.
Thank you.
You're welcome. I had to make up for the insult.
Yes, ma'am.
My daughter's getting ready to turn 16, and these young people that age, they're looking at their college opportunities now and what they want to do as far as writing. what advice can you give them, and what do you see trending, as far as writers in your industry?
In this industry, the degree doesn't really matter. I think it's the talent.
Right. I did go to, I went to Sarah Lawrence College. I went to get, my concentration was creative writing. And that I feel like I'm very unusual in the fact that one of my teachers there was Scott Snyder, and then I became his writing assistant, and then I got into comics that way. That I actually went directly through that system, but I also know that is not the norm.
Well, that was an example then of talent, because obviously he saw your talent, or he wouldn't have wanted you to be a writing assistant, right?
Well, I appreciate that. Thank you.
And Eliott conflated college and writing very interesting.
Yeah.
Replay Count Your Secret
that
Origin?
story
Yeah.
again?
That's why I teed you up.
Well, I wrote a term paper that included a Green Arrow story. And I wanted to illustrate that comics were useful ideological tools. They were being used that way in West Africa and in South America. And so I wrote this story where Green Arrow runs for mayor of Star City. And I got a B+. And I thought, okay, if you write a comic book as a part of a term paper, you either get an A or you get an F. Where do I get the B+? So I went to the professor and asked him that. And he had no explanation. So I sent the story to Carmine and Patino, who was the publisher at DC at the time, just a name on a piece of paper. And Carmine gave it to Julie, and Julie gave it to Neil Adams, and Neil read it on the subway and decided he wanted to draw it. So Julie bought it. That was good for 30 years. And
a TV series, because
and
that
if
is...
you, actually, yeah, funny thing about that. But everybody tells me every time somebody finds some eccentric way to get into the business, it closes.
Oh, yeah. So, to your question, going to school for a writing degree or an English degree or something will certainly provide your daughter with a lot of the underpinnings she will need for whatever she does. This is a tough field to get into, and it may take a while for her to get in here, so this would give her a set of skills until that opportunity presents itself. And with that said...
Can I say something else about it?
Please. Sure.
Obviously, she's going to go to the best school she gets into. But it doesn't matter. She's going to make her own education. She's going to make friends with her instructors, call people by their first names. It's going to be amazing for her, But, I applied to 4 top-of-the-line colleges. I got into one of them, and that's where I happened to go. And it was my 4th choice. But it made my personality. I mean, I don't think I'd be the same person if I'd gone anywhere else. I don't know who I'd be if I'd gone to Harvard. Hell with that.
Okay, got time for one more question, so how about you?
When you're writing, how frequently do you refer to the comics that you read as kids when you're writing?
All right, the question is, how often do you refer back to the stuff you read as a kid when writing today? Everybody should take a crack at
I
that.
don't know, always for me, because what I try to do is not copy the comics at all. Like, I have no interest in redoing the old comics, but I want to give people the experience that I had when I read something wonderful when I was a kid. So that, in that way, that's how I refer back to my childhood reading. I read a lot as a child.
Though I've occasionally in the past used elements from older stories, I'd much rather do what Louise said, which is make a current reader have the same sort of wonderful emotions I had when I was reading those comics and why they were great, but up to date, because the type of stories that were done in 1956 would not necessarily work today in any way, shape, or form. But there may be an element or a plot point that you could then do a story off of or something, acknowledging it all the time. Yeah.
I brought back crypto. I love that stuff. You have to make it work for the time you're working in.
Yep.
I kept telling Nelson Bridwell, you can't give crypto word balloons. You just can't give them thoughts. They have one thought. Dogs have one thought, and that is, where's the next meal?
Okay, Mark, and then James to wrap up.
Sure. It helps that I have a freakishly encyclopedic memory for all of the comic books I ever read. But what I'm drawing from when I draw from the past is not a plot moment or a cool villain so much as the feeling that I felt when I read that comic that I want to communicate. Because at the end of the day, all people care about, all readers care about when they walk away is how they felt about the story and when their blood was up. No one in this room can tell me the plot of any James Bond movie. But everyone remembers, you know, the big action scenes, the car chases, and the hot women, and whatever. Everybody remembers those moments when your blood is up. No, everybody remembers the iconic Spider-Man scene of him lifting the machine off his shoulders and all the rubble and stuff. But I bet there's not 1 in 30 people in this room who could tell me how he got there. That's the stuff you remember, and so that's what I try to bring into my work today.
Yeah.
Hi. James?
Oh boy. I definitely refer back to the stories, but exactly in the way that everyone on this panel has talked about it. It's definitely to tap into the exact spirit that actually made me want to do this. Like when starting Detective Comics, I went and reread, like, because I'm doing Detective Comics as basically X-Men starring the Bat Family. So I reread the entire Claremont run of X-Men, which is where I draw a lot of my influence. And that, like, and it wasn't to take pieces or anything, it was to get into, like, oh, this is how supporting characters come in and out of the story. This is the way that story arcs kind of pivot from one character's arc to another character's arc to another character's arc. And it was just like, and I started kind of studying it in a different way, but also like recognizing the moments of Waid. Like that's why in Detective 950 I went to like third person narration, because I was writing Cassandra Cain, who does not like her first language, like her first language is body language, so her internal monologue would not be in English. So the only way to fully express her emotions was to go at it from a third person perspective, and that, like, I reread a whole bunch of like Claremont narration to kind of like, oh, this is how he captured those emotions. So yeah, that's.
And with that, our time is up. Thank you so much for your attention and your questions. Let me ask everyone a group picture for archive. Come here, John. Yeah. Camera has
I said 1:30, you're fine.
Come on, like each other.
No, I'm not concerned about that one.
Go walk around until 1:30.
One more for insurance.
Take some shots.
That would be the
Thanks.
next. That will be the next.
Great, thanks.
Sally's got my wallet.
Pleasure. One thing. 12:15. Good morning. Oh, gee, I get a hug every day. You know, the French do that. Fix your head.
Thanks, guys. This was good.
Really? I'm sorry. Thank you so much.